And while you're doing that, let me extend on your behalf welcome to Dave and Brenda Babcock, who are here worshiping with us this morning. They've recently had a wedding in their family, and that has brought them near enough to us to where they could be here today. Welcome home. It's good to have you here today. God bless you. This is the final message in the series on Pursuing the Promise that we've been looking at together these past several weeks. And together we've been discovering through the pilgrimage of Joshua and the Israelites their pursuit of God's best for their lives. And throughout have been making not just observation but application, discovering how it is God desires to give us His best for our lives as well. And this morning we look together at chapter 10, verses 1 through 14, one of the final conflicts that the Israelites experienced while taking possession of the promised land. And beginning in verse 1, Now Adoni-Zedek, the king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had taken Ai and totally destroyed it, doing to Ai and its king as he had done to Jericho and its king, and that the people of Gibeon had made a treaty of peace with Israel and were living near them. He and his people were very much alarmed at this, because Gibeon was an important city, like one of the royal cities. It was larger than Ai, and all of its men were good fighters. And so Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, appealed to Hoam, king of Hebron, Piram, king of Jarmuth, Japhia, king of Lachish, and Debir, king of Eglon. Come up and help me attack Gibeon, he said, because it has made peace with Joshua and the Israelites. And then the 5 kings of the Amorites, the kings of Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, Eglon, joined forces. They moved up with all of their troops and took up positions against Gibeon and attacked it. And the Gibeonites sent word to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal, Do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us. Help us, because all of the Amorite kings from the hill country have joined forces against us. And so Joshua marched up from Gilgal with his entire army, including all of his best fighting men. And the Lord said to Joshua, Do not be afraid of them. I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you. And after an all-night march from Gilgal, Joshua took them by surprise. And the Lord threw them into confusion before Israel, who defeated them in a great victory at Gibeon. And Israel pursued them along the road, going up to Beth-horon, and cut them down all the way to Azekah and Makkedah. And as they fled before Israel on the road down from Beth-horon to Azekah, the Lord hurled large hailstones down on them from the sky. And more of them died from the hailstones than were killed by the swords of the Israelites. And on the day that the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel, Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, O sun, stand still over Gibeon. O moon, over the valley of Ajalon. And so the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the nation avenged itself on its enemies, as it is written in the book of Joshua. And the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There has never been a day like it, before or since. A day when the Lord listened to a man. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. What a tremendous statement in verse 14. There has never been a day like it. I think we all have days in our lives that we speak of with that kind of reverence and affection. Days that are of special remembrance to us for various reasons. Some of them are days that we look back on with a special fondness. The day our wife agreed to become our wife. The day our first child was born. The day we got that great new job, bought that beautiful new house. Days of tremendous joy and celebration, which will forever be especially dear to us. There are some days that are more infamous than famous. Days of sorrow, days of suffering, days that we are unable to forget because of all of the pain that was part of those days. The day that the one we love so much died and left us alone. The day when illness or disease came into our lives or the lives of those we love. Days that we will always never let go of because of the pain that we associate with them. But when the writer of Joshua said in verse 14 that there has never been a day like it, that this would forever stand in the lives and in the minds of the Israelites as a day that is unlike any other, he was not speaking of any human accomplishment. He was not speaking of any human deed, whether it be one of triumph or one of tragedy. The fame of this day for the Israelites was due to the divine activity of the Lord. This was a special day, not because of what man has done, but because of what God has done. What made it such a special day for the Israelites? What was the divine activity that would forever put an exclamation mark behind that day on their calendar? Well, according to verse 8, beginning in verse 8, we see that this was a special day, a day unlike any other, because this is the day that the Lord spoke. Verse 8 says, "And then the Lord said to Joshua." God talked to Joshua. God declared truth, insight to Joshua. It's always a special day when you hear from the Lord. There are conversations that we have every day, many of which we never remember past that day. Conversations with people and friends and loved ones and family members, and as dear and special as they are to us, those conversations in and of themselves hold no special meaning. But there's something about a conversation with God that's hard to forget. And Joshua had one of those conversations. This was a day in which God came alongside of his servant, and he spoke to him. Now, what does the Lord say when the Lord speaks? What kinds of words are the words of God? Well, note, if you will, that when the Lord spoke to Joshua, first he spoke words of inspiration. He said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid. I have given them into your hands." The words of God to his servant were words of encouragement. They were words of blessing. They were words of promise. They were words of hope. God did not come to his servant to belittle him or to berate him. God did not come to his servant so that he might speak words of cursing and reproach. God came and spoke to Joshua and said, "Joshua, I am here. Don't be afraid. Take heart. Be encouraged." Now, there are a lot of voices that we hear in our lives from time to time. And there are those voices of doom and destruction. There are those voices that speak to us words of hopelessness, words of discouragement, words that tell us what we aren't and what we will never be. But do you know that the voices that speak those words to you are never the voice of God? It's not the way God talks to his people. The words of the Lord are words of inspiration, words of hope. Not only were they words of inspiration, but often when God spoke to Joshua, they were words of instruction. God would come to Joshua, and in the midst of the battle, or at the outset of the battle, when the skies seemed most ominous, and the circumstances and the situation most frightening, the Lord would gather alongside, knowing that his servant didn't know what to do, and there he would speak words of instruction to Joshua. He would lay out before the leader of his people the plan. He would give him a battle strategy. And he would say to Joshua, this is my will for your life. Joshua, this is what I would desire for you to do. Here is where I am taking you, Joshua, and here are the steps that I would have you to travel as you get there. And every step of the Lord that Joshua took, every plan of God that Joshua embraced, every mention of his will and of his strategy that he followed proved successful. Listen to me. Joshua never failed when he followed God. The two occasions in which Joshua thought he knew what was best and went off on his own way and embraced his own will and embraced his own plans and failed to consult the Lord for his strategy and his desire. On two occasions Joshua did that, and on both he failed miserably. The words of the Lord are to guide and to direct the paths of his people. It was a special day. It was a day unlike any other. That was the day that the Lord spoke. But not only was it special because it was the day that the Lord spoke, it was special also because that was the day that the Lord helped. Verse 10 says that God caused the enemies of the Israelites to fall into confusion. And what verse 10 is saying is God got involved. God became a player in the plight of his people. God was not abstract, he was not indifferent, nor was he distant. He came alongside of them. And he participated in their lives and in their conflict. And how is it that God contributes to our lives? How is God partner with us in our spiritual pilgrimage? When God moves on our behalf, how does the Lord move? How does he help us? Well, when God got involved in the lives of Joshua and the Israelites, when he helped them, he did so by providing them with an opportunity. He confused the enemy. And what the Bible is saying there is God created an Achilles heel in the Amorite forces. You see, the Israelites were greatly outnumbered. Draw all of the great military minds together, if you will, and ask them to surmise the situation of the Israelites, the forces of those who were against them, and the resources that they had available to them. And every military mind of any significance would look at it and say, the Israelites don't have a chance. They're outnumbered. The forces and the military strength of those who they are now coming up against ought to be able to easily conquer them. But you see, the good news is the Israelites didn't need a chance because the Israelites had a prayer. And when you have a prayer, you don't need a chance. Prayer is all you need. And God got involved in the process, and he created in the midst of an impossible situation a possibility. He created an opportunity. He created an opening. He gave them the chance that everyone said they didn't have. And of all of the things that God brings into our lives, perhaps one of the greatest of which is this: he brings hope. And in the midst of a horrific situation in which all seemed lost, God gave the Israelites cause for hope. It was a day unlike any other. There's never been a day like it. It was a day in which the Lord spoke. It was a day in which the Lord helped. It was also a day in which the Lord intervened. Verse 11 says that the Lord caused large hailstones to fall from the sky. In fact, the Bible goes on and it says not only did God cause some kind of abnormality in nature by causing hailstones to fall from the sky, but that the hailstones that God caused to fall from the sky killed more Amorites that day than the swords of Israelites did. And what we see here is divine intervention on behalf of the people of Israel. What we call that commonly is a miracle. That's what a miracle is. God divinely intervenes in the normal course of human events. The normal course of human events. We understand the realities of the laws of nature. We understand how things work. We understand the reality of cause and effect. For a reaction, there's an opposite and equal reaction. We understand how the seasons fall one after the other, how summer leads to the fall, and fall leads to the winter, and winter leads to the spring. We understand the darkening of the skies and the culmination of the clouds and the anticipation of rain as a result of all of that. We understand. We've been able to look at the signs. We've been able to get a handle on what is happening in nature. We have learned to anticipate with some sense of predictability the dependability of the unfolding of natural events. But every now and then, God intervenes. He interrupts the normal flow of human events. God does something that only God can do. We call it a miracle. And the day that God caused those large hailstones to fall from the sky and to slay the soldiers of the Amorites, that was a miracle. When God does His miracles in our lives, when He intervenes divinely in the normal course of human events on our behalf, He always does it for two reasons. There's never been a miracle in all the Bible or in all of history that has ever been performed that has not accomplished these two things. The miracles of God, number one, always demonstrate the sufficiency of God. The miracles of God always cause us to know with certainty that God is more than sufficient for our every need. Why do you know of all of the things that you need to succeed in life and to be prosperous and a happy person? To be someone who is not eternity, who is not successful in just this world, but is successful in eternity, that all that you need to accomplish that, you find in God. When you make your packing list for life and begin to gather around you all of the different things that you want to take with you, that you know you're going to need as you live your life and spend your life, of all of the things on that list, there is only one thing you ever need on that list, and that thing is God. He is ever sufficient. There is not a circumstance, there is not a situation that you will ever face that God is going to throw His hands up on and say, I don't know what to do. I mean, there's not a problem you're ever going to come against that is going to befuddle the Lord. There is not a struggle you will ever endure that God will be insufficient for. He is not the God who is impotent. He is the God who is omnipotent. All-powerful. All-sufficient. And when He intervenes in our lives, interrupting the very laws of nature that He set in place to do something for us, He does it to demonstrate His sufficiency. Not only do the miracles of God always demonstrate the sufficiency of God, but secondly, they always demonstrate the sovereignty of God. The miracles of God make several statements, the most profound of which is, He is God. And above Him there is no other. There is no potentate that He ever bows to. There is no sovereign force in all the world that He is subject to. In your mind, imagine, if you can, all of the thrones and places of power that are known to you. The presidency and the power of the Oval Office, the halls of Parliament, and the power of the Queen or the King, the impressive, manipulative power of a cruel dictate who rules with an iron fist. Imagine, if you can, all of those powers and all of those positions of authority. And I tell you, as you stack them in your mind in the order of strength and significance, at the top of all of them always is the Lord. There is no power above his power. He alone is God. He alone is sovereign. He bows to no force and to no personality. God caused hail to fall from the sky. Coincidentally, the Amorite God was the God of the sky. When the Amorites prayed, they prayed to the sky. When the Amorites sacrificed, they sacrificed to the sky. When the Amorites worshiped, they worshiped the sky. The sky was their God. The sky was their defender. The sky was their friend. It was to the sky that they had sworn their allegiance. It was to the sky that they had put first and foremost in their lives and given themselves to. The sky was, after all, the God that caused the rain to fall and watered the crops. It was the sky, after all, that caused the water to fall and the rivers to flow and the lakes to fill. It was the sky that protected them. It was the sky that provided for them. It was the sky that they had put their hope and their confidence and certainly their affection in. And when God turned the sky into not their provider and their protector, but the means of their destruction, God demonstrated clearly that he was God of their God. They could cry out to the sky for deliverance all they want, but the hailstones that fell that day were caused to fall by a God who was greater than theirs. Why, it's the same thing God did with Pharaoh in Egypt. The 7 signs and wonders that God performed, which caused the Pharaoh's heart to be released and to cause the people of Israel to be set free. Every one of those plagues that God brought on the people of Egypt was a plague that took on, head on, the gods of Egypt. You see, you have to understand something. God is a jealous God. And he will have no other gods before him. And those things that we make gods in our lives, those things that have our supreme affection affixed to them, those things that we have sold ourselves for, those things that we so value and prioritize, that we worship them in trying to appease them and to hold on to them and to satisfy them, God will, if we do not give them to him, take them from us. It's the pattern of God. The miracles of God, when he intervenes in a divine way in the normal course of human events, he proves to us that he is sufficient, and he proves to us that he is sovereign. It was a day unlike any other day. There's never been a day like it. It was a day in which the Lord spoke. It was a day in which the Lord helped. It was a day in which the Lord intervened. Fourthly, it was a day in which the Lord delivered. Look at verses 12 and 13. And on the day the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel, Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, O sun, stand still over Gibeon. O moon, over the valley of Ajalon. And so the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the nation avenged itself on its enemies, as is written in the book of Jasher. And the sun stopped in the middle of the sky, and delayed going down a full day. This is the day in which the Israelites won the decisive victory. This was the day of deliverance for the Israelites. This was a day in which the final foes that would stand between them and the promise fell before them. This was that day. And clearly the deliverance that the Israelites won that day, the victory that the Israelites experienced that day, was the deliverance that God gave them. Who would ever look back on the day that the sun stood still so they would have a few extra hours of daylight to fight in, and ever be foolish enough to think for themselves that that was something they did. Only God could do that. Only God could deliver them from their enemies that way. God delivered them. And I want you to notice two things about the deliverance of God. Oh, this is significant. If you hear nothing else, I want you to hear this. When God delivered them, first of all, he spared no enemy. And what I want you to understand is God did not deliver them in part. God did not sorta, kinda deliver them. God completely delivered them. I mean, those things that stood between them and the promise that day were removed. Those sources of struggle, those issues of conflict, those enemies against who they were and what God would have them to be, that day when they turned to the Lord, were by God completely, totally taken from them. They were completely delivered. There was no enemy that was spared. And not only when God delivered them did he spare no enemy, but this is the second thing I want you to understand. When God delivered them, he spared no expense. For Pete's sake, he caused the sun to stand still. He put his hand on the orbits of the planets, on the motion of the solar system. Years ago, he started it with the spinning of his finger. And uninterrupted, it had spun ever since, and now he puts his hand on it, and he causes it to stop and to be still, so that his people might be delivered. Now there are biblical scholars who look at that and they say, surely that is an exaggerated statement. Surely that is a figurative statement. Surely it is symbolic language, not literal. And they would argue, after all, for God to cause the sun to stop. That's a big thing. It's a big thing. Would you agree that that's a big thing? Okay. I thought the Broncos winning the Super Bowl was a big thing. But the sun stopping in the sky. Now, the Rockies winning the World Series, that would be a big thing. Or the Nuggets winning the championship, or even being invited or getting a ticket to the championship would be a big thing. But the sun, God stopping the solar system and causing the sun and the planets to stand still so that the Israelites would have a few extra hours of daylight to finish what they had begun, that's a big thing. And there are people who look at that and they say, surely God did not do that. Surely that is figurative. Surely that is not literal. Surely that is symbolic of something, and there's some human way of reasoning that away. It was some kind of ecliptic event or some kind of planetary abnormality, but surely the earth did not stop. Surely the day was not prolonged. And to those I would simply say, how is it that we cannot believe that God would cause the sun to stand still for his people, when for his people he caused his son to hang on a cross? I want you to know this morning that as big a thing as the sun standing still in the sky is, it is eclipsed by light years with the image of God's only Son dying on a cross for the people he loved. Why would he cause the sun to stand? Why would he cause the sun to hang? So that he might deliver his people.
so that he might set them free, so that he might provide a release for them, so that that which had held them in bondage, that which had kept them back, that which had caused them to be downtrodden, that which had prevented them from living the lives he had made them to live, might forever be gone from them. And they could experience the blessing, the abundant life, the eternal life. God wants to deliver you. And he wants to spare no enemy, and he wants to spare no expense in it. You say, why would God do that? And the answer is simple. Maybe hard to believe, but it's simple. There's nothing theologically deep about this. Oh, God save us from theological depth that prevents us from seeing this. He stops and gives sons to the people he loves. He loves you. He loves you. Why did Jesus die on the cross? Give me some insight. Give me something deep. Give me something to chew over. You know, it's not any of those. It's simply this. For God so loved the world. And Paul says, and what can separate us from the love of God? Shall Amorites? Shall Gibeonites? Shall those in Jericho? Shall those in Egypt? Shall principalities, shall powers, shall famine, nakedness, sword, danger, peril, shall any of these things cause God to no longer love us? No, no, no. Nothing can separate you from the love of God. It was a day unlike any other. There's never been a day like it. It was the day the Lord spoke. It was the day the Lord helped. It was the day the Lord intervened. It was the day the Lord delivered. It was the day the Lord heard. Verse 14. What an incredible statement. A day when the Lord listened to a man. Joshua prayed the prayer, and God answered it. This incredible thing that was done on behalf of Joshua, this incredible thing that was done on behalf of all of the Israelites, that brought this incredible, total, complete victory into their lives. What was the motivation of this? What was the cause of this? What prompted the divine to move so miraculously on their behalf? What is it, pray tell? Why, it was a prayer. It was a prayer. You see, God hears the prayers of those who cry out for deliverance. God listens and responds to the men and the women and the boys and the girls who call from the tragedy and the difficulty of their circumstances and the oppressiveness of their enemies and their conflicts, and ask that his hand and his help might be extended to them, that they might be delivered, that they might be set free, that they might be able to pursue the promise that he has set before them. God hears and God answers those prayers. It was a day unlike any other. There's never been a day like it. It's the day the Lord spoke. It's the day the Lord helped. It's the day the Lord intervened. It's the day the Lord delivered. It's the day the Lord heard. It's the day the Lord fought. The final statement of verse 14, surely, surely, the Lord fought for Israel. Surely he did. Surely he did. Jehoshaphat would one day fight a force as formidable as the Amorite force that Joshua fought that day. The Moabs and the Ammonites came up against Jehoshaphat and the Israelites, and they desired to devour them, and they had the military might to do it. And Jehoshaphat, being a leader that God had called, but being a leader who was human nonetheless, was terribly frightened of the battle to come. And the night before the fight was to begin, he was cowering alone, in fear not just of the lives of his people, but in fear of his own life. And that night God came to him. It was for Jehoshaphat a night that was unlike any other. And God spoke to to Jehoshaphat. And in 2 Chronicles 20, verse 15, this is what God said to Jehoshaphat. I want you to hear this. In the midst of all of his fear over the battle that he was going to face, he measured the opposition. He understood his resources. He understood their resources. Doom and destruction seemed inevitable. He was certain he would die. And God came to Jehoshaphat at the eve of the battle, and this is what the Lord says to Jehoshaphat. He says, I want you to take heart. I don't want you to be afraid, because Jehoshaphat, this battle is not yours. It is mine. These people that you are fighting and this force that you are facing, you are going up against not on your behalf, but on my behalf, and there will never be a battle you fight for me that you fight alone. It's not your fight. It's my fight. That's the same thing that the writer of Hebrews said in looking back on this incredible day, this day of victory, this day of deliverance, this day of divine intervention. He said, surely the Lord fought that battle. Surely it was the Lord who won that victory. When I was 17 years old, I experienced in my life a day that is unlike any other. And for me, there has never been a day like it. I was waiting one day for surgery. I had just, the week prior, had my first operation. And in my first surgery, they removed 2 tumors from my neck, which proved to be cancerous. And they immediately scheduled me for another surgery. It was an exploratory surgery. They were literally going to open me up and go into my abdomen and physically look for cancer. The type of cancer that I had goes up, and it was already in my neck. The prognosis was not good. Perhaps the nurse was busy that day. Perhaps there was a lot going on. Perhaps she didn't fully understand the naiveness and the youthfulness of the patient on the gurney. But because of the delays in the OR, she simply left me alone in the hall, waiting outside of the OR room. My mother wasn't there, my father wasn't there, my pastor wasn't there. I was all alone. They had given me a shot earlier which was supposed to make me groggy. Let me tell you right now, it made me higher than a kite. I was wired. And with all of the anxiety and the fear and the apprehension of that moment, I was so scared. I have never been that scared in my life. I remember being so scared and so frightened that as I laid on that cot, as I laid on the gurney, waiting to go into the surgery, not knowing what was going to happen, if they were going to open me up and if they were going to find that I had cancer throughout my abdomen and that the prognosis was dim and they would simply sew me back up and it would be days that I would live, thinking seriously that that's exactly what they would find. I was so scared and so frightened that as I laid on that gurney, I began to shake. And I don't mean shiver. I don't mean a few quakes. I began to shake so much, and I'm telling you no lie, with God as my witness, the gurney that I was on began to bounce. I could hear the wheels coming up and hitting the linoleum. I was shaking so hard. I was that scared. I didn't know what to do. I was all alone. I had no one to call on. I had no one to turn to. And all I could think to do in that moment of terrible horror was to begin to call on the only name I knew could help. And I began to say over and over again aloud, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And you say, what was the prayer? That was the prayer. There was no quoting of Scripture. There was no singing of Psalms. There was no theological insight. There was no spiritual intensity. Just a scared little boy calling on the name of the only person he knew could be part of that moment. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And I want to tell you, this is my testimony. My faith is built on this moment. I stand on it. On that day, in that moment of fright, the Lord spoke to me. And he said, "Be not afraid." And the Lord helped me. He calmed me and caused me to stop shaking. The Lord intervened. I realized my hope was not in the surgeon. My hope was in the Lord. He's sufficient. And if cancer be the diagnosis, my God is greater than even cancer. The Lord delivered me. It's been 22 years, and I've had a lot of diagnoses, and I've had a lot of prognosis, and I've had a lot of tests over the years, but of all of them, not in any one of them has the word cancer ever been used again to speak of me. 22 years. You say, well, maybe it's in remission. Maybe it's taking time out. No, no, no. Get behind me, Satan. God's delivered me not in part, but in whole. You say, why did the Lord do that? The answer is simple. With all of the stupidity and ignorance that I had, frankly, I wasn't even Christian at that moment. I was a 17-year-old boy whose God was all of the things that the God of a 17-year-old boy would be. And in that moment, when facing terminal illness and death, I want you to know, 17-year-old boys, every one of my gods bowed at his feet. You say, why did he deliver you? Why did he calm you? Why did he speak to you? Because he heard my prayer. He heard my prayer. He heard my prayer. I didn't light any candles. I didn't study any courses. I didn't inflict any pain and cut any wounds. I simply called upon the name of Jesus. And he heard my prayer. And from that day forward, he's been fighting for me. Oh, to be sure, there are times when I have thought myself a better man, and I have taken on battles to fight for myself. And I want you to know I've lost every one. I've been humiliated. I've been embarrassed. But every time I have given the battle to the Lord and let him fight it, I have always won. It was a day unlike any other. There has never been a day like it. Is it possible that there is someone in this room right now who needs in their life that kind of day? Is it possible that there is someone in this place who is fighting an insurmountable foe and feeling if you go into that alone, you will surely be destroyed? Is it possible that there is someone here who has been struggling for deliverance from some sin, from some addiction, from some misplaced priority, from some bad memory, and you've never been able to experience complete deliverance? Is it possible that there's some couple here who's talking about divorce and feeling as if the things that have torn them apart are now so great that the marriage is unrecoverable and there is no choice but to take back the commitment that you made to God and to one another? Is it possible that there is someone in this place who says, Steve, today I need a day that will be unlike any other. I need the Lord to speak. I need the Lord to help. I need the Lord to intervene. I need the Lord to deliver. I need the Lord to hear my prayer and to fight my battle. Would you stand with me, please? Father in heaven, I pray for your people right now. And I pray for those who are hurting. I pray for those who are afraid. And I pray for those who are feeling as if they will be surely overcome. There are those, Lord, who are in need of a miracle. They see the unfolding of the normal course of human events in their lives. And they know that if all goes as all is supposed to go, it's not going to be good. And they're needing God to intervene, to interrupt, to do something that only God can do. God, I pray that this would be the day that for them would be unlike any other. I pray that in the weeks and months and years to come, they would look back on this day and say, there has never been a day like it since. Never been a day. That was the day when God heard, and the day when God delivered. Now in just a moment I'm going to finish my prayer. And it's going to be a prayer of blessing in which I'm going to invoke Trinitarian benediction, which I don't think we ought to take lightly, for healing and help in your life. But before I do that, there are some of you who need to step out from where you're standing and you need to come down here. God is wanting to do something in your life and you're wanting him to do it. And now you must publicly acknowledge it. You must declare, not just for those who are sitting next to you, but most importantly to yourself, that you need the Lord's help. If the battle you are fighting is to be won, it will be won by the Lord's power alone. And now is your time to admit that to yourself and to others. This could be, I believe, I sense the Lord in this place. I really do. This could be for you a day unlike any other. How bad do you want this victory? Would you step out from where you're standing right now and just join me standing down here for the closing of this prayer? You come right now. If you're looking for the victory, if you're needing the help of the Lord in your life with the foes that you're facing and the battles that you're fighting, if there's been something you've been struggling against and you've never gotten completely over it or been able to move past it, it continues to have a hold in your life and you don't want it to have a hold in your life anymore. You want to shake it as the dust from your sandals. You come forward right now. Let's ask God to do it. You say, why am I coming forward? You're coming forward because you're acknowledging before God. God is here. You're physically saying to the Lord, God, I need your help. And I'm not ashamed to admit that. For only when we acknowledge that we need the help of God do we open our hearts to receive the help of God. Let him help you. Don't keep fighting it yourself. Let God fight this battle. And every battle from this point forward. As everyone who wants to come. Father, you see these who are standing here. And Lord, you see more than them just standing here. That's all we're able to see. We know by their presence here that there's a need in their lives and that there's something they're asking you to do. But that's all we know. Oh, but God, you know so much more than that. You know what the need is.
You know the battle. You are intimately familiar with their struggle. You really are. In fact, God, I would say, you know their opposition and their obstacle even better than they do. You know what it really is. And God, right now, I pray in the name of the Father, in the name of the Son, and in the name of the Holy Ghost, that the Spirit of God would come upon your people, and that you would cause in their lives the sun to stop, and the battle this very moment to be won. And God, if there be any other gods that are standing alongside of them this morning, any other things that have had our affection and had our desires, that have had primary influence in who we are and what we do, anything that by our time and our purses we've paid more homage to than we have to you, God, know this, you need not take it from us. Now we give it to you. And what we have laid all too often on the altar of our heart, we lay now on your altar. Consume it with a holy fire and take it away. Father, I thank you now for the victory. And for the fact that in these lives, I believe that this will forever be a day unlike any other. And we give you glory for that. Let's worship the Lord this morning. His name is wonderful. We sang that earlier. What a beautiful story for that. Let's sing that song to the Lord. His name is wonderful. His name